Why hello there, and welcome back to Tabletop Ferox, and the 6th installment in my look into the wacky yet concise world of one-page role-playing games. A thing that I am very fond of because, well, I like different and interesting games, and the low stakes of developing a one-page game really gives designers a good opportunity to try out that one crazy idea, because if it works out, you can still develop it further, and if it doesn't, it's not a big deal. And also, as it is once again July, that means that the one-page RPG Jam 2K24 is just around the corner on itch, so I figured it might be a good opportunity to look at some of the games from the one-page RPG Jam 2K23, because that is a thing that I normally do, albeit usually less than a year after the jam occurs, and I just kinda forgot to do this time. Until now. And also it is probably worth pointing out that the 2023 jam saw an almost doubling of submissions over 2022, from 366 to 607. The reasons for which I could speculate on endlessly, but don't really care to, the important part being that I had to browse through all of those for this video. So let's get into some one-page RPG reviews, which as always are in a rough order of how much I like them. So first up, 100 Skeletons, a game in which you are a necromancer with 100 skeletons, hence the title, who you then send out to do various things. And basically the way this works is you roll 100 d6, and the number of dice that come up 1 are the number of skeletons that you send out. Then you write down where you sent them and why they didn't come back, and then remove those dice from the pool. And there is also an alternate set of rules that uses 2d10 in place of 100 d6, but that is not nearly as fun. So it is a very fun concept. The idea of managing this dwindling resource of 100 skeletons is an idea that has a lot of potential. Unfortunately, they don't really do much with it. You roll dice, send out that many skeletons who do not come back, and it really just feels like it's a good start of a resource management game that just doesn't materialize. And looks fine. And up next, 8 Room Dungeon, a solo dungeon crawl game with an interesting twist. The 8 rooms in question take the form of 8 cards that you print out, each of which contains a description, some kind of challenge, and instructions on which room to go to next. The cool thing though is how the format is actually integrated into the actual mechanics. So, for example, you can roll to sneak past a room without flipping the card, and therefore bypassing its challenge, but also rewards. Or you can roll to peek at the card before making that decision. So, average concept, I mean card-based dungeon crawl, it's been done, and even if it hadn't, it's not that amazing. But with some very interesting ideas behind it. I really like how the fact that it is a series of cards is something that's actually considered in the mechanics. Like, it is very much one of those things where I would really like to see this concept developed further. And it looks meh, but admittedly there's not much room to get fancy here. And next up, we have A Mole, which is a game about a mole colony who has a mole in their midst who is a worm. And aside from that silly concept, it actually has some interesting things going on here, with a cast of 17 characters, including the players, who must be investigated to find out which one of them is the worm. So, a fun little idea. Honestly, it is a fairly unremarkable concept, dressed up to be much more interesting. Like, if this was just dudes in a room somewhere, I would be aggressively indifferent towards it. Adding that silly mole and worm element is what makes it fun. And it is fairly well executed. Having a bunch of cards face down on the table representing different characters whose identities are only revealed after enough successful investigation checks has a really fun game feel to it versus just, oh, there are a bunch of unidentified people without anything to represent them. And Also, the worm has their own goals, which is revealing the identity of the 4 leaders. So if you are the worm, you are not only working against the other players and trying to avoid having your identity revealed, but trying to get the other players to work in your favor. And I would love to be giving this game a plus for execution, but I cannot, because I do not know how to play it. I know how to set up, I know the various win conditions, I know how many successful investigation checks must be made to reveal someone's true identity, I know how many investigation checks can be made in a single day, I even know that you are allowed to say that your stats are lower than they actually are to conceal your identity, but I do not know how to actually make a check. The only thing said on the issue is that to investigate someone, a player must do a check against 1d6 plus the target's corresponding stat. But it's never mentioned how that is checked. Do you just roll a d6? A number of d6? Do you add your stat? Is there a minimum value? Because the stats go as low as -5. Do you want to roll equal to or over the target? Because if you're rolling against 1d6 minus 5, that's a maximum target of 1. These are questions without answers. And free game design pro tip here, have someone who doesn't know how to play the game look over the rules, because they are going to spot all of the gaps that they do not have the knowledge to fill in. And like a lot of the one-page games, it just looks okay. And next, Dice Golem, which is a fairly simple golem battling game which essentially boils down to a calculated series of roll versus roll attacks with some additional spell casting mechanics added on. So it is a fun little idea, and it also definitely does the thing it is supposed to do. Like, if you've got some friends over and just want to play a little low investment dice rolling game, this will absolutely fill that need, and is also one of those things that definitely seems like while role-playing isn't really required, doing so will significantly improve your experience. Because you don't need to pretend that you are wizards trash-talking each other while your golems battle, but I think that's where the main fun lies. And it does go just a little bit harder than it really needs to on the layout, which is always appreciated. And finally, Bug Battle, which is a rules-light insect role-playing wargame. And just in general, I believe my fondness for invertebrates is well known, but also a one-page wargame is more than a little ambitious, and a thing that I think they actually did a pretty good job at. So, cool concept. I like games that do something a little bit different, and while this is far from the first insect-based game I've seen, it is something that I always like seeing, and honestly is a bit underutilized for just how well insects translate to tabletop gaming units. However, it does fall a little flat in the execution. Like, here's the thing, I have to judge these games based on what they claim to be. And while the wargaming aspect here is pretty good, the role-playing game aspect is, let's just say, lacking. The only rules provided outside of combat are some basic attribute tests, the biggest issue there being something of an extreme difficulty. Like, you have a 50% chance of succeeding on a medium difficulty task with a maxed out stat, and a starting character can only have one attribute that doesn't auto-fail on a difficult test. And while the general layout is nice but unremarkable, they really went above and beyond in providing character cards and tokens. So overall, this is a pretty good war game, just not a very good role-playing game. And those were 5 one-page role-playing games that I felt like talking about. And if you are interested in tabletop game design, I highly recommend doing the one-page RPG Jam, which, as mentioned earlier, starts in late July and runs through August, and is a great opportunity to give yourself the experience of taking a game from concept to finished product with relatively low investment, which is especially good if you are the sort of person who has trouble actually finishing the things that you are working on, because it really forces you to severely limit your scope and time frame. And if it's bad, who cares? Most of them are bad, but the worst game you make is still better than the best one that you don't. And if you want even more restriction, which is actually good for creativity, they do provide an optional theme. Although admittedly those are usually kind of lame, so I guess I could give you an alternate optional theme for the jam. Let's see, how about prehistoric horror? That could be interesting, or it could be Dino Crisis. And thank you for watching. If you enjoy my content, you can follow me on Blue Sky, Twitter, even Tumblr. Especially Tumblr. There are links in the description. And extra special thanks to my Fightin' Flail Snails, Broken Unicorn, D-Stex, Hasterfan, Omar Parker, Randy Mulholland, Renee D, Sean Betts, Stephen Kramer, Toshiro Kuro, and Trey Adams. If you'd like to be cool like them, check out my Patreon. Also, channel memberships are now a thing, so, check those out if you want. But if you don't want to do that, that's cool too. You can still hit all the lovely buttons, like, subscribe, these other videos that the dark, unseen hand of the YouTube algorithm has lovingly selected for you, which I'm sure are lovely videos that you will also enjoy. And I will see you next time.